The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of London as tourists gathered outside Buckingham Palace. Among the crowd stood Marcus Wellington, a royal guard who had served the crown for nearly 8 years. His tall frame was perfectly still, his red uniform pristine, and his iconic bearskin hat sat firmly on his head. Marcus had learned long ago that being a royal guard meant more than just protecting royalty. It meant becoming a symbol of discipline, honor, and unwavering dedication. The summer months always brought massive crowds to the palace. Families with excited children, elderly couples fulfilling lifelong dreams, and young travelers seeking the perfect photograph, all mingled together behind the iron gates. Marcus had seen thousands of faces over the years, but he had trained himself to remain focused, unmoved by the constant chatter and camera flashes that surrounded him daily. On this particular Tuesday morning, the crowd seemed larger than usual. A cruise ship had docked at Southampton, bringing hundreds of eager tourists into the city. Among them was a woman named Patricia Thornberry, a wealthy businesswoman from New York who carried herself with an air of superiority that made others uncomfortable. Patricia had built her fortune in real estate and had grown accustomed to getting whatever she wanted whenever she wanted it. She wore an expensive designer dress, oversized sunglasses, and carried a handbag that cost more than most people earned in a month. Patricia pushed her way through the crowd with little regard for those around her. She stepped on a child's foot without apologizing, bumped into an elderly man without a second glance, and complained loudly about the heat, the crowds, and the inconvenience of having to wait like everyone else. Her husband, Gerald, followed quietly behind her, looking embarrassed by her behavior but too tired to intervene after 40 years of marriage. As Patricia reached the front of the crowd, she spotted Marcus standing at his post. Something about his stillness irritated her. She had always believed that people should acknowledge her presence, that her wealth and status demanded recognition. Yet here stood this guard, completely ignoring her as if she were invisible. This was unacceptable in her mind. She stepped closer to Marcus, deliberately crossing the boundary that tourists were supposed to respect. A small rope barrier marked the area where visitors should not pass, but Patricia saw it as a mere suggestion rather than a rule. She stood directly in front of Marcus, just inches from his face, and waved her hand in front of his eyes. Marcus remained perfectly still. His training had prepared him for such moments. Royal guards were taught to maintain their composure regardless of what happened around them. They were living statues, representing centuries of British tradition and military excellence. Moving or reacting would be seen as a failure of duty. Patricia's irritation grew. She was used to commanding attention, and this guard's refusal to acknowledge her felt like a personal insult. She turned to her husband and said loudly, "These guards are ridiculous. They're just playing dress-up like children. I bet he's not even a real soldier." Gerald tried to pull his wife back. "Patricia, please. Let's just take a photo from here and move on. We have other places to visit today." But Patricia was not finished. She had an audience now, and several tourists had stopped to watch the interaction. Some looked uncomfortable, while others filmed the scene on their phones. Patricia thrived on attention, and she decided to make this moment memorable. She reached out and poked Marcus in the chest with her finger. "Hello, anyone home? Or did they hire a mannequin?" She laughed at her own joke, expecting others to join in. A few people chuckled nervously, but most remained silent, sensing that something wrong was happening. Marcus felt the poke but did not react. His jaw remained set, his eyes fixed on the distance. Inside, however, he felt a mixture of emotions. Disrespect came with the job, and he had experienced worse over the years. Drunk tourists had tried to knock off his hat. Children had pulled at his uniform, and countless people had made jokes about his inability to move. But something about Patricia's entitled attitude struck a deeper chord. Patricia was not deterred by his lack of response. In fact, it only fueled her determination to get a reaction. She walked around him slowly, examining him like he was an object in a museum. "Look at this, Gerald. I could probably push him over and he wouldn't do anything. These guards are all for show. They're not real soldiers at all." An older British woman in the crowd finally spoke up. "Excuse me, madam, but you really shouldn't be doing that. These men have served their country with honor. They deserve respect." Patricia whirled around to face the woman. "Mind your own business. I paid good money to visit this country, and I'll do whatever I like. This guard is here for entertainment, nothing more. The British woman looked shocked. Entertainment? These guards have fought in real wars. They've risked their lives. They're not here for your amusement. Patricia dismissed her with a wave. Whatever you say. But if he's such a brave soldier, why won't he even look at me? Because he can't. Because he's not allowed to. Because he's just following silly rules that don't mean anything in the real world. She turned back to Marcus and this time reached up toward his bearskin hat. Several people in the crowd gasped. Touching a royal guard's uniform was strictly forbidden, and attempting to remove any part of it was considered a serious offense. But Patricia either didn't know this or didn't care. Just as her fingers were about to touch the hat, Marcus made his first movement. His hand shot up with incredible speed, catching her wrist firmly but without causing pain. The sudden motion startled Patricia and she stumbled backward slightly. The crowd fell completely silent, everyone holding their breath to see what would happen next. Marcus's eyes finally moved, fixing on Patricia with an intensity that made her take another step back. For the first time since the interaction began, she felt a flutter of uncertainty. This was not a statue or a mannequin. This was a trained soldier, and she had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. What happened in the next few moments would change not only Patricia's day, but her entire understanding of respect, service, and the true meaning of honor. Marcus released Patricia's wrist and immediately returned to his position, standing perfectly still once again. But something had shifted in the atmosphere. The crowd that had been watching with mild amusement now looked at Patricia with open disapproval. Camera phones continued recording, capturing every moment of her embarrassment. Patricia rubbed her wrist, though Marcus had not hurt her. She was simply shocked that someone had dared to physically stop her. In her world of business meetings and country club luncheons, people rarely challenged her directly. She had surrounded herself with yes-men and employees who feared losing their jobs. This guard, however, answered to a higher authority than her bank account. Before Patricia could formulate a response, 2 palace security officers approached from nearby posts. They had been monitoring the situation and decided it was time to intervene. The older officer, a man named James Prescott with silver hair and kind eyes, addressed Patricia with professional courtesy. "Madam, I'm going to have to ask you to step back behind the barrier. Physical contact with royal guards is not permitted under any circumstances. These men are on active duty protecting important national landmarks and royal property." Patricia tried to regain her composure. He grabbed my wrist. "I should file a complaint. This is assault." Officer Prescott remained calm. "Madam, the guard was well within his rights to stop you from touching his uniform or hat. That action is protected under military law. However, if you continue to harass or attempt to touch the guards, we will have to escort you from the premises and potentially issue a citation." Gerald finally found his voice. "Patricia, for goodness sake, let's just go. You're making a scene." But Patricia was not ready to back down. Her cheeks had flushed red, partly from embarrassment and partly from anger. "This is ridiculous. These guards stand here like statues for tourists to photograph. That's their entire purpose. And now you're threatening me for simply trying to take a closer look?" A young tourist, a college student from Manchester named Sarah, spoke up from the crowd. "Actually, that's not their purpose at all. My uncle served as a royal guard. These men go through intense military training. They've been selected from elite regiments. They're real soldiers who happen to perform ceremonial duties. It's an honor to be chosen for this position." Patricia scoffed. "An honor? Standing perfectly still while tourists gawk at you? That's not honor. That's being a living statue." Officer Prescott decided to try a different approach. "Madam, perhaps you're not aware of the history and significance of these positions. Would you like me to explain what these guards actually do and what they've accomplished?" Patricia was about to refuse, but the growing crowd of onlookers and the multiple phones still recording made her reconsider. Walking away now would look like retreat, and her pride would not allow that. "Fine. Enlighten me." Officer Prescott gestured toward Marcus, who remained at attention, his eyes fixed forward as if the entire conversation was not happening around him. "This particular guard, Guardsman Wellington, has served in Afghanistan and Iraq. He's completed 2 tours of duty in active combat zones. He's earned commendations for bravery under fire. 3 years ago, he carried 2 wounded soldiers to safety during an ambush despite being injured himself. He has a medal for valor sitting in a drawer at his home because he's too modest to display it." The crowd had grown silent, hanging on every word. Patricia's expression began to change, though she tried to hide it. Gerald looked at his wife meaningfully, hoping she would finally understand the gravity of her behavior. Officer Prescott continued. These ceremonial duties are actually considered among the highest honors in the British military. Guards must meet strict requirements. They must be at least 6 feet tall, have exemplary service records, and pass rigorous tests of discipline and endurance. They stand for hours in all weather conditions, burning sun, freezing rain, snow, without complaint. They do this because they understand that they represent something larger than themselves. They represent duty, sacrifice, and centuries of proud tradition. Sarah, the college student, added her own perspective. My uncle told me that standing as a Royal Guard taught him more about self-discipline and mental strength than any combat situation. He said it's easy to react when someone's shooting at you because your training takes over, but standing perfectly still while someone mocks you or tries to humiliate you requires a different kind of strength. It requires you to rise above your ego and remember your purpose. Patricia felt something unfamiliar, a twinge of guilt. She looked at Marcus again, really looked at him this time. She noticed the small scar above his eyebrow, barely visible beneath the shadow of his bearskin hat. She saw the calluses on his hands, the hands of someone who had worked hard and sacrificed much. She observed the straightness of his posture, not the stiffness of a statue, but the bearing of a man who took pride in his duties. For a moment, she imagined him in a desert somewhere, carrying wounded comrades while bullets flew around him. She pictured him writing letters home to loved ones, wondering if he would survive to see them again. She thought about the choices he had made to serve his country, choices that put him in danger while people like her sat in comfortable offices making money. Gerald touched her elbow gently. Patricia, I think we should apologize and move on. But apologizing had never been Patricia's strong suit. She had built her business empire on being tough, on never showing weakness, on always having the last word. Admitting she was wrong felt like admitting defeat, and defeat was something she could not tolerate. Instead, she said defensively, "Well, how was I supposed to know all that? They should put up signs explaining who these guards are and what they've done. It's not fair to expect tourists to just automatically know." Officer Prescott nodded patiently. There is actually a plaque near the main gate that explains the history and significance of the Royal Guards. But you're right that many tourists don't read it. However, madam, there are certain universal signs of respect. When someone is clearly on duty, in uniform, and standing at attention, the appropriate response is admiration from a respectful distance, not mockery and physical contact. An older gentleman in the crowd, a veteran himself judging by the regimental pin on his jacket, added his thoughts. Young lady, I don't know what things are like where you come from, but here we honor those who serve. This lad stood at his post with dignity while you did your best to humiliate him. He showed remarkable restraint. A lesser man might have responded differently. Patricia felt the weight of judgment from every direction, the phone still recording, the disapproving faces, the disappointed look from her own husband. She had come to London expecting to be impressed by the grandeur of British history and tradition. Instead, she had become a living example of what not to do, a cautionary tale that would likely end up on social media within hours. What she did not yet realize was that this moment, this uncomfortable confrontation with her own behavior, was about to teach her lessons that no business school or self-help book ever could. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the most unexpected places, delivered by the most unlikely teachers, and sometimes those teachers never say a single word. The standoff continued for what felt like an eternity, but was actually only a few minutes. Patricia stood there, caught between her pride and her growing realization that she had made a serious mistake. The crowd around her had swelled to nearly 50 people, all watching to see how this situation would resolve itself. A young mother holding a toddler's hand stepped forward. She had been quiet until now, but something about the situation compelled her to speak. Excuse me, but I think my son should hear this story. She looked at Patricia directly. My husband is serving overseas right now. He's been gone for 8 months and we don't know when he'll be home. Every day I wake up wondering if today will be the day I get a knock on the door with bad news. These guards, these soldiers, they all have families who worry about them. They've all made sacrifices that most people can't begin to understand. Her voice cracked slightly with emotion. When my son asks me what his daddy does, I tell him that he's a hero who protects people. I tell him that soldiers are brave and strong and deserve our respect. And then we come here, hoping to show him what honor and duty look like. And instead he sees adults treating these soldiers like their toys or entertainment. The little boy looked up at his mother, not fully understanding the situation but sensing her distress. Then he looked at Marcus standing tall in his red uniform, and his face broke into a wide smile. He tugged on his mother's hand and pointed. "Mommy, that soldier looks like Daddy." The mother's eyes filled with tears. She nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. He's just like Daddy. He's very brave." Patricia felt something crack inside her chest. She thought about her own father, who had served in Vietnam. He had never talked much about his experiences, but she remembered the nightmares he had when she was a child. She remembered finding him sitting alone in the dark sometimes, staring at nothing. She had never really understood what he had been through, and by the time she was old enough to ask meaningful questions, he was gone. Gerald saw the change in his wife's expression. After 4 decades together, he could read her moods better than anyone. He saw the walls she had built around herself beginning to crack. He gently squeezed her hand, offering silent support for whatever she decided to do next. Officer Prescott, seeing an opportunity for resolution, spoke again in a kind but firm tone. "Madam, I understand that cultural differences can sometimes lead to misunderstandings. Perhaps in your country, ceremonial guards are viewed differently. But here these men are soldiers first and ceremonial guards second. They're not actors or performers. They're active military personnel who have earned their positions through exceptional service." Patricia finally found her voice, though it was quieter than before. "I didn't know. I mean, I should have known, but I didn't think about it. I just saw someone standing still and I thought—" She trailed off, realizing how shallow her thoughts had been. "You thought he was there for your entertainment," the British woman from earlier said, not unkindly but matter-of-factly. "You saw someone in a costume rather than a uniform. You saw a prop rather than a person. It's easy to do when we forget to look beyond surface appearances." Sarah, the college student, pulled out her phone. "Would you like to see something? I think it might help put things in perspective." She navigated to a video and held up her phone so Patricia could see. The video showed a changing of the guard ceremony, but it was different from the typical tourist footage. This was shot from a behind-the-scenes perspective, showing the guards preparing for their duty. It showed them helping each other with their uniforms, checking their equipment with military precision, and standing in a circle as their commanding officer reminded them of their responsibilities. In the video, a young guard spoke to the camera. "People think we're just standing there doing nothing, but we're actually constantly alert. We're watching for threats, monitoring the crowd, maintaining security. Our stillness is deliberate. It's discipline. It's training. And yes, it's also tradition. We're part of a legacy that stretches back centuries, and every day we put on this uniform, we're honoring everyone who wore it before us." The video ended, and Sarah put her phone away. "That's what you were mocking. That's what you tried to disrupt." Patricia's face had gone pale. The full weight of her actions was finally hitting her. She looked at Marcus again, and this time she saw him as the young mother saw him, as Sarah saw him, as the veteran in the crowd saw him. She saw a man who had chosen duty over comfort, service over self, honor over ease. But she still struggled with the next step. Apologizing meant admitting she was wrong, and Patricia had spent her entire adult life avoiding that admission. In business, showing weakness meant losing ground to competitors. Admitting mistakes meant inviting lawsuits or losing deals. She had trained herself to never back down. Never show regret, never give an inch. Yet standing here, surrounded by strangers who had witnessed her behavior, she realized that the business rules she lived by did not apply to every situation in life. This was not a negotiation or a power play. This was a moment of basic human decency, and she had failed the test spectacularly. Gerald leaned close and whispered in her ear, "Trish, you've spent 30 years building a reputation as a tough businesswoman. Nobody can take that away from you. But right now you have a chance to show that you're also a good person who can admit when she's wrong. That takes a different kind of strength, but it's just as important." Patricia's eyes met her husband's, and she saw love and encouragement there, not judgment. She thought about the person she had been when they first met, before the success and money had changed her. She had been kinder then, more open, more willing to admit her faults. When had she become so hard, so unwilling to bend? She took a deep breath and turned to face Marcus directly. He was still standing at attention, still staring forward, still maintaining his post despite everything happening around him. His discipline was remarkable, almost inhuman in its perfection, and yet Patricia now understood that it was profoundly human. It was a choice he made every second, a commitment to something larger than himself. The crowd waited in silence. Even the traffic noise from the street seemed to fade away. This was a moment of genuine human drama, and everyone present understood its significance. Whatever Patricia did next would define not just this encounter, but would say something profound about character, growth, and the possibility of change. Patricia opened her mouth to speak, but before she could form the words, something unexpected happened. A group of tourists from Japan who had been watching the entire scene began to bow deeply toward Marcus, showing their respect in the manner of their culture. Following their example, several other tourists began to nod respectfully toward the guard or place their hands over their hearts. The spontaneous show of respect from strangers seemed to release something in Patricia. If these people who had no personal connection to this guard could show such honor, surely she could find the courage to do the same. The question was whether her pride would finally allow it. Patricia watched the Japanese tourists as they maintained their bows, showing respect that transcended language and culture. Something about their simple, genuine gesture broke through the last of her defenses. She realized that respect was not about weakness or surrender. It was about recognizing value in others, acknowledging their humanity, and understanding that everyone's story matters. She stepped forward, closer to Marcus but careful to stay behind the barrier this time. Her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together. When she spoke, her voice was different from before, stripped of arrogance and pretense. "Guardsman Wellington," she began, using his name for the first time. "I owe you an apology. A sincere one, not just words meant to smooth things over. I came here today with no understanding of who you are or what you represent. I saw a uniform and a tradition I didn't understand, and instead of showing respect or curiosity, I showed contempt. I treated you like an object rather than a person. I was rude, dismissive, and completely inappropriate." Marcus remained at attention, his eyes forward, but something in his posture suggested he was listening. The crowd had gone completely silent, phones still recording, but now for a different reason. They were witnessing something genuine, a moment of true character growth. Patricia continued, her voice growing stronger but remaining humble. "I learned something today that I should have learned a long time ago. Respect isn't something that should be reserved for people who can benefit us or impress us. It's something we should offer to everyone, especially to those who serve and sacrifice for others. You've served your country in ways I cannot imagine. You've faced dangers I've never had to consider, and you've done it all while maintaining dignity and discipline that I clearly lack." A tear rolled down her cheek, surprising everyone, including herself. Patricia Thornberry rarely cried, and certainly never in public. But this was not a performance. This was real emotion breaking through years of carefully constructed walls. "My father served in Vietnam," she said quietly. "He never talked about it much, but I know it changed him. I know he struggled with things he saw and did. And I know that he was proud of his service even though it cost him so much. I wish I had understood that better when he was alive. I wish I had asked him more questions, shown him more appreciation. Maybe if I had, I wouldn't have been so disrespectful to you today." Gerald stood beside his wife, his hand on her shoulder, offering support. He had heard Patricia mention her father before, but never with such raw emotion. This trip to London was revealing sides of his wife he had not seen in years, maybe decades. Officer Prescott spoke gently. "Ma'am, I think your father would be proud of what you're doing right now. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong, especially in front of strangers. That's the kind of courage these guards show every day. The courage to do the right thing even when it's difficult." Patricia nodded, wiping her eyes. She looked at Marcus again, wishing she could see his face clearly, wishing she could know if her words were reaching him. But he remained perfectly still, a soldier on duty, bound by protocol and tradition. The young mother with the toddler stepped forward and stood beside Patricia. "I accept your apology," she said softly, "even though you weren't apologizing to me. But as someone who loves a soldier who knows the sacrifices they make, I want you to know that what you said matters. Understanding matters. Changing matters." Sarah, the college student, nodded in agreement. "My uncle always said that the biggest enemy of respect is ignorance. Not the ignorance that comes from lack of information, but the ignorance that comes from lack of interest in learning. You were ignorant of what these guards represent, but now you've learned. That's what matters. The elderly veteran who had spoken earlier walked slowly toward the group. His age showed in his careful steps, but his bearing was military through and through. He stopped in front of Patricia and looked her directly in the eyes. "Young lady," he said in a voice that carried authority earned through decades of service, "I've lived through many wars and seen many changes in this world. But one thing that never changes is the importance of honor, duty, and respect. You lost sight of those things today, but you found them again. That's worth something. That's worth a lot, actually." He turned to face Marcus and snapped to attention, delivering a crisp military salute. Marcus, recognizing the salute from a fellow serviceman, responded in the only way protocol allowed. He brought his right hand up to his bearskin hat, returning the salute with precision and respect. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but it was powerful enough to bring tears to many eyes in the crowd. The veteran lowered his salute and turned back to Patricia. "See that? That's the brotherhood of service. It crosses generations, backgrounds, and nations. Every soldier, every guard, every person who wears their country's uniform is part of something eternal. You can't buy your way into it. You can't fake your way into it. You earn it through sacrifice and dedication." Patricia felt humbled in a way she had never experienced before. In her business world, she was powerful and feared. Here, surrounded by people who understood service and sacrifice, she felt small but also strangely grateful. Small because she realized how much she did not know, how much she had taken for granted. Grateful because these strangers were teaching her lessons she desperately needed to learn. Officer Prescott checked his watch and then looked at Marcus. "Guardsman Wellington's shift is ending in approximately 10 minutes. At that time, he'll be relieved by another guard and will march back to the guard room. What happens after that is up to him. But I can tell you that these guards are real people with real feelings. They hear everything that's said around them, even though they cannot respond while on duty." Patricia felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she would have a chance to speak with Marcus person to person, without the barrier of duty between them. Maybe she could apologize directly, look him in the eyes, and truly make amends. Gerald checked his own watch. "We can wait," he said simply. "We have nowhere more important to be." The crowd began to disperse slowly, though many people remained, wanting to see how the story would end. Some tourists who had just arrived asked what was happening, and those who had witnessed the entire event explained in hushed, excited tones. The story was already spreading, jumping from person to person, phone to phone. Patricia found a bench nearby where she could sit and watch Marcus without disturbing him further. She sat there thinking about paths not taken, words not said, and lessons learned too late. She thought about her father and wondered if he was watching somehow, if he knew that his daughter had finally begun to understand what his service had meant. As the minutes ticked by, Patricia felt something shifting inside her. It was not just guilt or embarrassment anymore. It was something deeper, a fundamental reconsideration of what mattered in life. She had spent decades chasing money, power, and status. But what had Marcus been chasing? Honor, duty, service. Things that could not be bought or sold. Things that had to be earned through choice and sacrifice. The crowd waited with her, an unusual gathering of strangers united by a shared experience. And somewhere in that waiting, in that quiet anticipation, something beautiful was forming. A community of understanding that crossed all boundaries of nationality, age, and background. They were all learning together, growing together, becoming better versions of themselves together. The sound of marching boots echoed across the courtyard, announcing the arrival of Marcus's replacement. A younger guard approached with the same perfect posture and military precision. The changing of the guard was a choreographed ritual performed countless times, yet it never lost its sense of ceremony and importance. Patricia watched intently as the two guards went through the formal exchange. Marcus stamped his feet in sequence, performed a series of precise movements with his rifle, and then stepped aside as the new guard took his position. The entire process took less than 3 minutes, but every movement was executed with absolute perfection. Once relieved of his duty, Marcus turned and began marching toward the guard room, his steps measured and deliberate. Patricia felt a moment of panic. What if he disappeared inside and she never got the chance to speak with him properly? What if he refused to acknowledge her after what she had done? Officer Prescott, who had remained nearby, seemed to sense her worry. He walked over to Patricia and spoke quietly. The guardsmen usually spend a few minutes in the guard room before changing out of their ceremonial uniforms. However, I had a word with Guardsman Wellington's commanding officer. He's aware of the situation and has given Wellington permission to speak with you briefly if he chooses to do so. Patricia felt a wave of nervousness unlike anything she experienced in boardrooms or business negotiations. This was not about winning or losing, not about deals or contracts. This was about genuine human connection and making amends for genuine human failure. Marcus emerged from the guard room a few minutes later, still in his uniform but with his bearskin hat removed and his rifle secured. His face was now fully visible, and Patricia could see that he was younger than she had imagined, probably in his early 30s. He had kind eyes, she noticed, though they held a certain weariness that suggested he had seen more of the world's darkness than anyone his age should have to witness. He walked toward Patricia and the small group that had remained. His commanding officer, a stern-looking man with silver hair and multiple medals on his chest, accompanied him. Gerald stood and offered his hand to Marcus. "Guardsman Wellington, I'm Gerald Thornberry. This is my wife, Patricia. We both want to thank you for your service and apologize for the disturbance earlier." Marcus shook Gerald's hand firmly. "Thank you, sir. No apology necessary from you." His voice was deeper than Patricia had expected, with a hint of a northern accent. He turned to Patricia, and she stood to face him directly. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Patricia saw the person she had treated so poorly, but she also saw something else. She saw compassion in his eyes, not anger or resentment. She saw understanding, not judgment. It made her feel even worse about her behavior, but also gave her hope that reconciliation was possible. "Guardsman Wellington," she began, her voice catching slightly. "I know I apologized while you were on duty, but I want to say it again now that you can actually respond. I was incredibly rude to you. I was disrespectful and ignorant. I treated you like you were less than human, and I'm deeply ashamed of my behavior." Marcus listened quietly, his expression neutral but not unkind. When she finished, he was silent for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Mrs. Thornberry, I appreciate your apology. Truly, and I accept it." He paused, then continued with thoughtful honesty. "What happened today isn't unusual. We deal with difficult situations regularly. People from all over the world come here, and sometimes they don't understand our traditions or the significance of what we do. Sometimes they're disrespectful without meaning to be. And yes, sometimes they're disrespectful because they genuinely don't care." Patricia winced at that last part, knowing she had fallen into the latter category. Marcus continued, "But the reason we maintain our composure, the reason we don't react, isn't just about following orders or upholding tradition. It's about something bigger. It's about showing that discipline and dignity can triumph over provocation. It's about being better than our worst impulses. Every day I stand at my post, I'm practicing that discipline. I'm reminding myself that my duty is more important than my ego." The young mother who had spoken earlier listened with tears in her eyes, thinking of her husband overseas. The veteran nodded approvingly, recognizing wisdom that usually came only with age and experience. Patricia felt humbled by Marcus's words. He was not only forgiving her but teaching her something profound. "How do you do it?" she asked. "How do you stand there while people mock you or try to provoke you? How do you not react?" Marcus smiled slightly, the first smile Patricia had seen from him. "Honestly, it's not easy. I'm human, just like everyone else. I feel irritation, frustration, even anger sometimes. But I've learned that reacting to every provocation gives power to the provocateur. By remaining still, by maintaining my composure, I keep my power. I stay in control." He looked at the crowd that had gathered, then back at Patricia. "But I also think about perspective. When I was deployed in Afghanistan, I saw real hardship. I saw people who had lost everything. Children who had never known peace, soldiers who made the ultimate sacrifice. When I compare those experiences to standing still while someone makes jokes about me, the choice becomes easy. This duty, this ceremony, it's an honor. It's peaceful. It's safe. How could I possibly complain about it?" Sarah, the college student, spoke up. "That's exactly what my uncle said. He told me that after serving in combat, standing as a royal guard felt like a privilege, not a burden. He said it gave him time to think, to process his experiences, to find peace in discipline and routine." Marcus nodded. Your uncle is right. There's something meditative about it, actually. When you stand perfectly still for hours, you learn to quiet your mind. You learn to be present. You learn patience in its truest form. These are lessons that serve me well in all areas of my life. Patricia absorbed his words like water to a desert. She had spent her entire life rushing from one thing to the next, always chasing the next deal, the next success, the next achievement. The idea of being still, truly still, was foreign to her. But listening to Marcus, she began to understand its value. Gerald, who had been listening quietly, asked a question that had been on his mind. Guardsman Wellington, what made you decide to join the military? What drew you to a life of service? Marcus considered the question carefully. My grandfather served in World War II. He died before I was born, but my grandmother used to tell me stories about him. She said he believed that freedom wasn't free, that every generation had to earn it and protect it. I grew up believing that too. When I turned 18, I had opportunities for university, for different careers, but I felt called to serve. I wanted to be part of something larger than myself. I wanted my life to mean something beyond personal success or comfort. The commanding officer, who had remained silent until now, added his perspective. Guardsman Wellington is being modest. He's one of the finest soldiers I've ever had the privilege to command. His service record is exemplary. His courage under fire saved lives, and his conduct in this ceremonial role has been nothing short of outstanding. The British Army is better because of soldiers like him. Marcus looked slightly embarrassed by the praise, but Patricia could see the pride in his eyes. Not arrogant pride, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had lived according to his values, that he had made choices he could be proud of. Patricia felt something shifting in her understanding of success and achievement. She had always measured her worth by her bank account, her business victories, her material possessions. But standing here listening to Marcus and his commanding officer, she realized that there were other measures of success that mattered more. Legacy, honor, service, making a positive difference in the world. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with various members of the crowd asking Marcus questions about his service, his experiences, and his perspective on duty and honor. He answered each question thoughtfully, revealing himself to be not just a disciplined soldier but also a thoughtful, articulate person with depth and wisdom beyond his years. Patricia listened to every word, filling notebooks in her mind with lessons she had never learned in business school or boardrooms. She learned about sacrifice from his stories of leaving family for months at a time. She learned about brotherhood from his descriptions of the bonds formed between soldiers in difficult circumstances. She learned about perspective from his ability to find meaning and purpose in every duty, whether dramatic or mundane. Eventually, Marcus glanced at his watch and apologized. I'm sorry, but I need to report back for debriefing and then prepare for evening duties. But I want to thank all of you for this conversation. It's reminded me why I do what I do. It's reminded me that sometimes the small moments, the personal connections, matter just as much as the grand ceremonies. Before he could leave, Patricia reached into her expensive handbag and pulled out a business card. She looked at it for a moment, this small rectangle that represented her entire identity in the business world. And then she did something completely out of character. She pulled out a pen and crossed out her business information. On the back, she wrote her personal email address and a simple message. Thank you for teaching me what true strength looks like. She handed it to Marcus. I don't expect you to use this. I'm not trying to network or make a business connection, but if you ever find yourself in New York, or if you ever need anything that I might be able to help with, please reach out. I'd consider it an honor. Marcus took the card and read the message. His expression softened and he extended his hand to Patricia. She shook it, feeling the calloused strength of a working man's grip, so different from the soft handshakes of corporate executives. Mrs. Thornberry, everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what we do after we make them. You've shown remarkable courage today, and I respect that. I hope the rest of your visit to London is wonderful. As Marcus walked away with his commanding officer, the crowd finally began to fully disperse. People approached Patricia to shake her hand or offer words of encouragement. The young mother thanked her for setting a good example for her son. The veteran patted her shoulder and told her she had done well. Sarah, the college student, asked if she could share the story on social media, promising to focus on the positive transformation rather than the initial conflict. Patricia agreed, understanding that her moment of public failure had transformed into a moment of public growth, and perhaps that story could help others learn the same lessons she had learned. Gerald took his wife's hand as they walked away from Buckingham Palace. "I'm proud of you, Trish. That took real courage." Patricia squeezed his hand, feeling closer to her husband than she had in years. "I feel like I've been sleepwalking through life, focused on all the wrong things. That young man, Marcus, he's half my age, but he's wiser than I am. He understands things I'm only just beginning to grasp." They walked in silence for a while, processing the morning's events. As they passed a small park, Patricia stopped and sat on a bench. Gerald sat beside her, content to wait as she gathered her thoughts. "My father tried to tell me once," Patricia said quietly. "I was in my 20s, just starting out in business. I was so focused on making money and proving myself. He said to me, 'Patricia, don't forget that the richest people aren't always the ones with the most money. Sometimes they're the ones with the most purpose.' I dismissed it as old-fashioned thinking. I thought he was just from a different generation that didn't understand modern success." She looked at Gerald with tears in her eyes. "But he understood something I didn't. He understood that service and sacrifice create meaning in life. He understood that discipline and duty are gifts, not burdens. He tried to pass that wisdom to me and I ignored it. But today a young soldier who never knew my father taught me the same lesson. And this time I was finally ready to hear it." Gerald wrapped his arm around his wife. "It's never too late to learn, Trish. It's never too late to change." They sat there for a long time, watching people pass by, children playing, elderly couples strolling hand in hand. Patricia found herself really seeing these people for the first time in years, not as obstacles to navigate around or potential business contacts, but as fellow humans, each with their own stories, struggles, and triumphs. Over the next few days, as Patricia and Gerald continued their vacation in London, she found herself changed in fundamental ways. She smiled at service workers and asked about their day. She held doors for others without expecting thanks. She visited the Imperial War Museum and spent hours reading about military history and the sacrifices made by ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. On their last night in London, Patricia wrote a long letter to Marcus. She didn't mail it to any official address because she didn't have one. Instead, she left it with Officer Prescott at Buckingham Palace, hoping it would reach the guardsman who had changed her life. In the letter, she wrote about her father, about her regrets, and about the lessons she had learned. She wrote about how one moment of confrontation had cracked open her carefully constructed world and let light into dark corners she had been ignoring for years. She thanked Marcus not just for his forgiveness but for his example, for showing her what it meant to live with purpose and principle. 3 months later, Patricia was back in her New York office, but she was not the same person who had left. She had restructured her company to focus more on ethical practices and employee well-being. She had started volunteering with a veterans organization, helping soldiers transition to civilian life. She had reconnected with her father's old military buddies and listened to their stories with genuine interest and respect. Her employees noticed the change. Some were skeptical at first, wondering if it was a temporary phase. But as weeks turned to months, they realized that Patricia had undergone a genuine transformation. She was still driven and successful, but now her success was tempered with humility, and her drive was directed toward purposes beyond personal gain. One afternoon, Patricia's assistant brought in the mail and mentioned that there was a handwritten letter in the stack. Patricia opened it and immediately recognized the neat, precise handwriting of someone with military training. Marcus had written back. His letter was brief but meaningful. He thanked her for her kind words and told her that he often thought about their encounter. He wrote that being a royal guard had taught him many things, but that day had reminded him why those lessons mattered. He had been privileged to be part of her transformation, and he hoped she would continue growing and learning. He ended the letter with a quote from his grandfather. "Honor is not something you're born with. It's something you choose every day in every action and every word. It's the sum of 1,000 small decisions to do the right thing, even when the wrong thing is easier." Patricia framed that letter and hung it in her office where she would see it every day. It became her reminder that one moment can change everything, that growth is always possible, and that the most important lessons often come from the most unexpected teachers. Years later, when people asked Patricia about the turning point in her life, She would smile and tell them about a day in London when she learned the true meaning of strength from a young soldier who never raised his voice, never lost his composure, and never stopped being who he was meant to be, even in the face of disrespect and provocation. She learned that real power comes not from dominating others, but from mastering yourself. She learned that true wealth is measured not in bank accounts but in positive impact on the world. And, most importantly, she learned that it's never too late to become a better version of yourself. The story of the rude woman and the royal guard spread far beyond that day at Buckingham Palace. Videos and accounts circulated on social media, viewed by millions. But unlike many viral moments that simply showcase bad behavior, this story had a redemptive ending that inspired people around the world. Teachers used it in classrooms to discuss respect and personal growth. Military recruiters found that it helped people understand the depth and dignity of military service. Therapists referenced it when working with clients on humility and change. But perhaps the most important impact was on ordinary people who saw themselves in Patricia. People who realized they had been dismissive or disrespectful, who had forgotten to honor those who serve, who had lost sight of what really matters in life. The story gave them hope that change was possible, that one moment of clarity could lead to a lifetime of better choices. Marcus continued his service, eventually rising through the ranks and becoming an officer. He never sought attention for his role in Patricia's transformation, but he carried the experience with him as a reminder that every interaction matters, that every person deserves respect, and that sometimes standing still and silent can speak louder than 1,000 words. And somewhere, in whatever realm exists beyond this one, Patricia's father smiled, knowing that the lessons he tried to teach his daughter had finally taken root, delivered by a young soldier.